He slipped the pills out of her birth control pack and replaced them with fakes. Every single one. For 6 months, Evan Mercer didn't do it out of passion. He didn't do it because he loved her. He did it because a pregnant woman is a controllable woman, and Nia Holloway was the most important chess piece in a game she didn't even know she was playing. He sat across from her at dinner, watched her swallow those pills with a sip of water, and smiled. He held her hand in movie theaters. He told her she was the first woman who ever made him want to stay. He said it while knowing exactly what he was doing to her body, her future, her entire life. If you found out the person who said, "I love you," every night had been running a quiet, calculated operation against you from the very first hello, what would you do? What would be left of you? Before we go any further, if stories like this hit you somewhere real, do us a favor and subscribe to this channel. Hit that like button and drop a comment letting us know what city or country you're watching from. We want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the night everything broke open. The rain came down mean that night. Not the kind of summer rain that cools things off and smells like wet grass, the kind that batters windows and turns streetlights into smears and makes the whole city feel like it's trying to drown itself. Manhattan in July, past 11, and the storm had been building since sundown. Thunder rolled low and long across the Hudson, rattling the glass towers along the west side like something enormous was clearing its throat. Kang Tae-jun stepped off the private elevator onto the 54th floor of Kang Meridian Group's headquarters at 11:47 p. He wasn't supposed to be there. The Seoul call had ended 3 hours ahead of schedule, a counterparty folding faster than expected. Terms agreed. The whole operation wrapped clean before midnight Korea time. His driver had been ready. His penthouse was 12 blocks north. He had no reason to come back to the office. But Tae-jun had spent his entire adult life surviving because he listened to the things that felt wrong. And something had been feeling wrong for 6 hours, a low, formless unease sitting behind his sternum that he couldn't name and couldn't shake. So when his car passed the Meridian Tower on the way uptown, he told his driver to stop. The lobby security let him through without a word. They always did. Nobody asked Kang Tae-jun where he was going. The 54th floor was dark, except for the emergency strip lighting that ran along the baseboard's pale white lines tracing the carpet like runway markers. All the offices were closed. The city glowed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, fractured by rain. The whole floor smelled like recycled air and old printer paper and the faint trace of whatever cleaning product the overnight crew used. He stood still for a moment, just inside the elevator lobby, listening. He heard breathing. Not the building, not the HVAC hum, or the elevator cables settling. This was human, ragged, coming from the direction of the private archives room at the far east end of the executive corridor. Tae-jun moved without turning on any lights. Old habit. The archives room door was ajar. A thin line of yellow light cut across the carpet from inside. Someone had left the emergency battery lamp on. He pushed the door open with 2 fingers. Nia Holloway was sitting on the floor beside the second filing cabinet with her back against the wall and her knees pulled to her chest. Her blazer was crumpled beside her. Her heels were off, abandoned sideways near the door. Her face was didn't have a word for it at first. Shattered. That was the word. Not crying the way people cry at movies or funerals. Crying the way people cry when something inside them has actually broken. She didn't hear him come in. He stood there for maybe 5 full seconds, watching her, before he said anything, and in those 5 seconds, his mind ran through every protocol. Clear the floor. Sweep for threats. Establish the perimeter. This is a breach scenario until proven otherwise. Then she made a sound half-gasp, half-sub, and pressed the back of her hand against her mouth, and every protocol evaporated. Holloway. She jerked like she'd been struck. Her head snapped up. Her eyes were red, swollen, mascara tracking down both cheeks in dark lines she hadn't bothered to wipe. She stared at him for a moment, like she couldn't process what she was seeing, like his presence in this room at this hour was information her brain refused to accept. She tried to stand. Her legs didn't cooperate. She grabbed the filing cabinet and pulled herself up, and immediately started smoothing her blouse, pushing her hair back, attempting to reconstitute herself into the version of herself she performed every day. "Stop," he said. She stopped. He walked into the room and looked at her directly. He didn't look away from the mascara or the trembling jaw or the hands that couldn't hold still. He looked at her the way he looked at situations, the way he'd trained himself to look at things that mattered. Completely. What happened? She opened her mouth, closed it. Her chin was doing something uncontrolled. She looked at the floor, at the wall, at some middle distance that didn't exist anywhere, except at him. Then he saw it, on the floor beside her purse. A small white rectangular stick with a pink cap. She tried to push it partially under the filing cabinet. But the angle was wrong. He could see the two clear pink lines in the result window from where he stood. His chest went very quiet. He looked back at her. She'd tracked his eyes to the floor. She saw him see it. Whatever composure she'd been frantically pulling together disintegrated on the spot. Her face did something awful and real, and she pressed both hands over her mouth and turned away like she could hide from him if she just didn't look at him. Nia, he said. He hadn't used her first name in 4 years. Not once. She turned back around slowly. Her eyes were streaming. She was shaking. I'm sorry, she said. Her voice was almost nothing. I'm so sorry. I'll be gone before morning. I just needed a minute. You're not going anywhere until you tell me what's happening. It's not your problem. Someone in this building at midnight is my problem. He kept his voice level. Not gentle. Exactly, he didn't know how to do gentle. Never had, but careful. Like he was handling something that could shatter further. Talk. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. Took a breath that hitched badly on the way in. Then she looked at him with the expression of someone who has decided that the worst has already happened and there is nothing left to protect. I found something, she said. In Evan's briefcase. Evan Mercer, the attorney. Nia had been seeing him for almost 8 months. Tae-jun knew this the way he knew everything about his staff. Not because he pried, but because information reached him. He'd run a background check on Mercer when the relationship became visible. Clean record, legitimate practice, no flags. What did you find? She bent down and picked up her purse. Her hands were still shaking when she reached inside, pulled out her phone, navigated to her photos, and held it out to him. He took the phone. He went still. The first photograph was of himself, a long lens shot, taken from street level, showing him entering the side entrance of a building in Koreatown that did not have a legitimate business address. The kind of shot that required planning, positioning, and prior knowledge of his movements. He swiped. Financial documents. Internal Meridian documents, the kind that live 3 layers of access control deep. Documents that no one outside a handful of people should have ever been able to touch. Count numbers. Transfer records. Shell company structures. He swiped again. Security layouts for this floor. Handwritten notations, marking camera positions, guard rotation times, the location of the stairwells. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He kept swiping. There were photographs of Nia's phone screen message threads, calendar entries, a document she'd clearly pulled up on her personal device. Whoever took these had been inside her apartment, sitting close enough to photograph her screen without her knowing. He reached the last image, a screenshot from a burner phone. A message thread, the other side labeled only with a string of numbers. The message read, "Final confirmation received. Package to be delivered tonight. Tower access confirmed. 3-man team. Make it look federal." Tae-jun handed the phone back without changing his expression. "When did you find this?" 3 hours ago. Her voice was thin. He left his briefcase in the bedroom when he went to shower. It slipped off the chair, and there was a compartment. A hidden one, inside the bottom lining. "I wasn't looking for anything. I was just picking it up." "Did he see you find it?" "No. I put everything back. I acted normal." A pause. A horrible pause. "I sat through dinner with him after. I watched him eat. He talked about a case he was working, and I sat there and ate my food." Her voice cracked on the last word. "I didn't know what to do. I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was misunderstanding." "You weren't misunderstanding anything." She closed her eyes briefly. "He knows where you go," she said. "He knows about things I've overheard. Things I mentioned without thinking. He'd ask about my day, and I'd tell him little things, just normal things. I didn't think." Her voice broke. She brought it back, through what looked like sheer force of will. "I brought him into your life without knowing. I let someone into my life, and I didn't know what he was, and he used me to get to you, and I didn't know." "Stop." She stopped. "You didn't know," he said. "That's not the same as doing it." She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were bright with tears. She was refusing to shed. He looked at her, really looked at her, in a way he rarely looked at anyone. 4 years she'd been in this organization. 4 years of 6A. emails, and impossible scheduling demands, and classified briefings she was trusted with, because she'd proven herself reliable in ways that went beyond reliable. She remembered everything. She managed everything. She never asked the question she wasn't supposed to ask. She had never once, in 4 years, given him a reason to doubt her. And tonight she had come back to a building she knew might be a target because she would not leave him unwarned. She was still processing that when every light in the building went out. Not a flicker, not a surge or a brownout. Everything simultaneously killed at the source. The emergency battery lamps kicked in a half-second later, flooding the archives room in flat red-orange light that made everything look like the inside of a burning building. Tae-jun moved without thinking. He was beside Nia before the backup lights fully stabilized. One hand on her shoulder, turning her toward the door. That wasn't the weather, she said. She was already pushing her feet back into her heels. Her hands were steadier than he expected. No. He was scanning the doorway, the corridor, the slice of the executive floor visible through the gap. Nothing moving yet. They cut the external grid. Whoever your boyfriend really works for, they're already in the building. She absorbed that in about 2 seconds. The elevators are down, she said. Yes, the stairwells. She was thinking visibly the way he'd watched her think through complicated logistics problems, fast and structured. They'll move up from the lobby. They'll expect the exits to be covered. The exits are covered. There's a way out that isn't on any security map. She looked at him. Her eyes were still swollen and red, but the crying was completely gone, pushed down somewhere, replaced by something harder and cleaner. When they renovated the executive kitchen 18 months ago, I handled the contractor, permits myself. There's a maintenance shaft, connects to the sub-basement parking the old service infrastructure. It's not on the updated floor plan used, the original 1987 blueprints. He stared at her. The contractor sent me the old prints by mistake, she said. I filed them instead of returning them because I thought they might be useful someday. A beat. I didn't know it would be this. Gunfire erupted at the far end of the corridor. Not warning shots. Controlled, deliberate, the sound of a tactical team, moving room to room, clearing the floor. Tae-jun put his hand on Nia's back and pushed her toward the door. Show me. They moved through the corridor while glass was still shattering, 200 feet behind them, while flashlight beams swung through the floor-to-ceiling office windows like searchlights sweeping open water. She stayed low without being told to. She didn't freeze. She turned left at the break room, instead of right the longer route to the kitchen, he realized. Because the shorter route crossed a window wall that faced the interior atrium where the shooters would have sight lines. He noticed that she'd calculated that, in the dark, while still shaking from everything that had come before. The kitchen was on the south side of the executive floor, a narrow galley space the catering team used for board meetings. Nisi went straight to the back wall, to what looked like a recessed utility panel beside the commercial refrigerator. She pressed both palms flat against the upper left corner. The panel popped outward 6 inches. Behind it was a steel access door, latched with a bar handle. Behind the door, darkness, the smell of old grease and rust and 50 years of building infrastructure, and the top of a vertical metal ladder descending into nothing. She looked back at him. In the red emergency light, her face was unreadable except for the eyes. 40 feet, she said. Maybe more. He could hear the team working closer, boots on tile, the mechanical click of a doorway being cleared. Go, he said. She grabbed the ladder and started down without another word. He pulled the access door closed behind them both, plunging everything into total dark, and followed her down into the shaft. The metal rungs were cold and slightly slick with condensation. The sounds of the building above them, gunfire, boots, the crackle of tactical radio, he could now faintly hear came down through the shaft walls in distorted fragments. They were 60 seconds into the descent when he heard the access panel bang open above them. Flashlight beams cut down through the shaft. Faster, he said quietly. She was already moving as fast as her grip would allow. He stayed directly above her, his body between her and the light. His shoulders ached from the angle. One of her hands slipped on a rung, and she caught herself with the other one, and he heard the small, involuntary sound she made, pain or fear, probably both, and she kept going. Above them, someone started down the ladder. The shaft ended in a concrete sub-basement that smelled like motor oil and standing water, low-ceilinged and crisscrossed with overhead pipes. Naya dropped off the last rung and landed hard, stumbled, caught herself against a concrete pillar. Her palms were bleeding. He could see it, even in the near dark, the dark wet on her hands. He dropped beside her and pointed toward the far wall. Parking structure. She nodded and moved. The sub-basement connected to the underground garage through a service corridor that hadn't been used in years, floor gritty, with dust, fluorescent fixtures dead overhead. They came through a rusted fire door into the parking structure's lowest level, and both of them stopped moving for 1 second just to breathe. His armored SUV sat near the exit ramp, exactly where it had been left by his driver. The garage was dim, quiet, smelling of exhaust and concrete cold. They had made it. And then someone started clapping, slow, deliberate, echoless in the low concrete space. From between two parked cars on the far side of the ramp, Evan Mercer stepped into the open. He was dressed differently than Nia had ever seen him. No blazer, no tie, nothing of the careful corporate presentation she'd known for 8 months. Dark clothing. A gun held easy at his side, the way someone holds a tool they're comfortable with. Behind him, 2 more men separated from the shadows, positioning themselves to cover the exits. He looked at Naya with an expression that wasn't regret, wasn't malice, wasn't anything she had a name for. "I'm glad you're still breathing," he said. "We should talk." Naya went completely still, and Tae-jun stepped in front of her. Clapping stopped. Evan Mercer let his hand fall to his side, the gun loose in his grip, and he looked at the two of them, the way a man looks at a problem he's already solved. Easy, patient, like he had all the time the night could offer and knew exactly how it ended. Tae-jun didn't move from in front of Nia. The garage hummed around them, the ventilation system, cycling low, water, dripping somewhere in the dark, behind the parked vehicles, the distant moan of the storm pressing down through 50 feet of concrete above their heads. The 2 men behind Evan had fanned out to angles. Not amateurs. They weren't standing close together the way nervous men do. They'd done this before. Tae-jun counted the distance to his SUV. 40 feet, maybe 45. The key fob was in his jacket pocket. The vehicle was armored to stop rifle rounds. The problem was the 40 feet. "You want to put the weapon down," Tae-jun said. His voice came out flat, and even the way it always did when something inside him had gone very cold. Evan looked almost amused. "I really don't." Nia's voice came from directly behind Tae-jun's left shoulder. She had moved without him sensing it, shifting to see around him rather than stay hidden. Her voice was strange, not the crying voice from the archives, not the controlled voice from the shaft. Something in between. Something scraped raw. "What is this?" It wasn't a question. She'd said it like a statement about the nature of reality. Evan turned his attention to her, and something in his expression changed, not softened, exactly, but adjusted, recalibrated, like he was shifting registers, finding the frequency he'd used with her for 8 months. "Come out from behind him," Evan said. "Don't," Tae-jun said immediately. Naya didn't move. Evan's jaw moved slightly. The almost amusement faded. He looked back at Tae-jun, with something more honest in his face now, not hostility exactly, but the specific look of a man who was reassessing a variable that behaved unexpectedly. "She was never supposed to be in the building tonight," Evan said. "That's not how this was designed." And yet, Tae-jun said, and yet, Evan let out a slow breath through his nose. "She's not part of the operational mandate. She doesn't need to be touched. You surrender now, walk away from the vehicle, and she leaves this garage breathing. That's a real offer." "You destroyed her life," Tae-jun said, "and you're offering her survival as though that's generosity." Something moved across Evan's face too quickly to name. "It's a better offer than the alternative." Naya came around Tae-jun's left side. He put his arm out to stop her, and she walked through, not shoving him, not defiant, just moving with the particular determination of someone who has decided they are no longer going to stand behind anything. She stopped beside him. Her arms were at her sides. Her hands were still bleeding at the palms where the ladder had torn them. She was looking at Evan with an expression Tae-jun had never seen on her before. Not anger, not fear. Something older and quieter than either. How long, she said. Evan looked at her. How long before we met was this planned? Pause. The ventilation hummed. One of the men behind Evan shifted his weight, and the small sound of it echoed off the concrete walls. Don't say my name like that. Her voice didn't rise. That was the thing, it didn't rise at all. It just went harder. How long? Evan looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, 14 months. She absorbed that. 14 months. She'd been seeing him for 8. 6 months before he ever introduced himself. Before the coffee shop, where they'd supposedly met by accident. Before the first date, the first phone call, the first time he said her name like it meant something to him. Coffee shop, she said. Yes, you were already there. I was already there. She nodded. Once, slowly, like someone receiving a medical diagnosis they'd already halfway suspected. Her jaw was tight. She was holding herself very still in the way people hold themselves still when they are refusing, through sheer muscular effort, to fall apart. What was the original plan, she said, before tonight? Nia, this isn't the time. What was the plan? Her voice cracked on the last word, and she brought it back immediately, jaw tightening further. You owe me that. Whatever else you are, you owe me that much. The two men behind Evan looked at each other. Evan didn't look at them. He was looking at Naya with an expression that had gone complicated in a way Tae-jun found himself watching carefully, because complicated was useful. Complicated meant something unscripted was happening in Evan Mercer's chest. Evan said finally. Passwords. Financial architecture. The routing structure for the secondary accounts. Your position gave you proximity to documents that would take a federal task force 3 years to subpoena. He paused. You were going to give them to me. I would never have. You wouldn't have known you were giving them. His voice went quieter. I wasn't going to ask you to. I was going to watch what you accessed. When, how you moved through systems. Going to photograph your screens. I was going to be standing right next to you while you worked from home, and I was going to memorize what I needed, and you were never going to know. The silence after that was the specific kind of silence that lands like a physical weight. Naya turned her head slightly to the right, not looking at anything, just needing to look somewhere that wasn't his face. Tae-jun watched her. He watched the way her breathing changed shallower, faster, then deliberately slowed. He watched her pull herself back from whatever edge she'd gotten close to. He had seen trained men do that with less success. And the pregnancy, she said, still looking at the wall to her right. Evan said nothing. Evan. She turned back. The pregnancy. That was a contingency. A contingency if you became resistant. If you started asking questions I couldn't deflect. Pregnant woman who believes the father of her child loves her is... He stopped. Chose a different word. Manageable. The word landed in the space between them, like something dropped from a height, and that Tae-jun felt the quality of the air in the garage change. It wasn't a feeling. He could explain the way a room's temperature seems to shift right before violence, some animal signal that predated language by about 50,000 years. He felt it in his own body, and he watched it move through Nia's. She didn't cry. He almost expected her to, and he would not have blamed her, but she didn't. Her face went through something that was too complicated and too private for him to name, a whole sequence of expressions compressed into about 3 seconds, and then it went still. So the Betrayal, he said. He said it clean. No apology in his voice, no cruelty either. Just information. You interfered with my contraception a beat. Yes. One of Evan's men made a small sound, not words, not even quite a cough. Just the involuntary noise of someone who hadn't anticipated hearing that particular thing out loud. Naya stood there. Tae-jun looked at her profile. She was staring at Evan with the steady, unblinking look of someone who is using everything they have to stay upright. Then she said very quietly, "Get out of my way." "Naya," I said, "get out of my way." Her voice went up. Finally, not a scream, but something with teeth in it, something that bounced off every concrete surface in the garage. You don't get to stand there and explain to me how you manufactured my entire life for the past year, and then say my name, like you're still that person. You are not that person. That person never existed, and I am standing here bleeding and pregnant, and I am done. Evan's expression finally cracked. Not into guilt, into something more like frustration, like a man watching a plan deteriorate in real time. You don't understand the position you're in. I understand it perfectly. She crossed her arms over her chest. You need him. She tilted her head toward Tae-jun. You need him alive long enough to be useful, which means your people upstairs are working with orders not to kill him outright. Which means you're not going to shoot me in a parking garage because everything you came here for falls apart the minute you make this about something other than business. She looked at the two men flanking him, and those two know it. Nobody moved. Tae-jun looked at her sideways. He hadn't run that calculation himself yet. She had done it faster than he had, standing there with torn palms and 8 months of ruined trust sitting on her chest. Evan studied her for a long moment. Something in his posture shifted a subtle thing, a slight rearrangement of weight. That's very good, he said. I worked for him for 4 years, she said, nodding at Tae-jun. I know how people who operate at this level think. I know how they structure contingencies. I know what leverage looks like, and I know what it doesn't look like. A pause. Shooting us in a parking garage before you have what you came for is not leverage. Failure. You're right, Evan said, which is why I need both of you to come with me. No, Tae-jun said. That's not actually a choice I'm giving you. You're giving me exactly that choice. Tae-jun took one step forward, not toward the men on the flanks, toward Evan, closing the distance between them by 6 feet in a single unhurried movement that made both of the flanking men tighten, but not shoot. You need me functional. You need me cooperative. Damage me in this garage, and whatever you're planning, with the information you wanted from my organization, becomes significantly more complicated. He stopped. So we're at an impasse, which means you're going to tell me who sent you. Evan looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled. It was a different smile than anything Naya had seen from him in 8 months. It was the smile of a person who has decided to stop performing. Chairman Seo Min-chul, he said. Tae-jun went very still. You know that name, Evan said. It wasn't a question. I know that name. Then you know what it means that he sent me. Tae-jun did know. Seo Min-chul had been a rival for 11 years, a man who operated in the same spaces, moved through the same networks, and had spent the better part of a decade trying to find a way to bring Kang Meridian Group to its knees. Not through direct confrontation. Seo Min-chul didn't do direct confrontation. He did what Evan Mercer had done. He found the seams, the soft places, the people who got too close to powerful men without knowing what they were walking into. He's been patient, Tae-jun said. 14 months, Evan said, which you know, because I just told you. And the team upstairs. They're not federal, Evan said. They're dressed federal. There's a difference. The plan was always to make it look like a government operation that went sideways. Jurisdictional confusion. Takes weeks to untangle. He tilted his head slightly. You'd be 3 days in the ground by the time anyone figured out what actually happened. Nia made a sound barely audible, more exhaled breath than anything, but Tae-jun heard it. And Nia, he said. Evan's smile stayed but went thin at the edges. The original plan didn't involve her being here tonight, but the revised plan, a pause. The ventilation system cycled. Water dripped. The revised plan adapts to conditions on the ground, Evan said. Tae-jun looked at him steadily. She was on the casualty list. It wasn't a question either. He'd read it in the pause. Evan didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. He looked at Nia for a moment with something that was almost recognizable as something human, and then he looked away. Naya had heard it. Tae-jun knew she'd heard it because he watched her spine straighten, the specific, involuntary postural response of someone absorbing information that is terrible enough to be clarifying. She had come back to this building tonight to save Tae-jun's life. She had been on the list. The man standing 20 feet from her with a gun had known that when he kissed her goodbye. You're going to do something for me, Tae-jun said to Evan. I'm not in the business of doing things for you. You're going to call the team upstairs and tell them to pull back to the elevator lobby and hold position. Evan laughed a short, genuine sound. Why would I do that? Because if you don't, I'm going to tell you something about the current state of your father's financial infrastructure that is going to require your immediate and complete attention, and you're not going to want your team listening when I do. The laugh stopped. The garage went quiet except for the drip and the hum. Evan Mercer Tae-jun filed the name away as a fiction, because it obviously was stared at him, with the eyes of a man who has just felt the ground shift, underneath a position he believed was solid. You don't know anything about my father, Evan said carefully. I know what my father means, which tells me you're not an employee. Tae-jun watched the tell register on Evan's face too small for most people to catch, a micro-tension in the area around the eyes that lasted less than a second. I know Chairman Seo has a son he's kept out of public record. I know that son has been operating in American markets for approximately 3 years under a constructed identity. He paused. I know the constructed identity has a name. I didn't know until 60 seconds ago that the name was Evan Mercer. The two flanking men looked at each other. Evan Mercer Seo Hyun-woo, because that was who was standing in front of them now. The name, like a key turning in a lock, was very still. How, he said. Does it matter? It matters to me. It shouldn't. Tae-jun kept his voice level. What should matter to you is that I have information about your father's operation that you don't have. What should matter to you is that information has a shelf life. And every minute your team spends tearing apart my executive floor is a minute that shelf life gets shorter. He let that sit for 2 full seconds. Call them back. The silence stretched. Nia stood beside Tae-jun, without moving, without speaking, barely breathing. Her arms were still crossed over her chest, one hand pressed against her opposite elbow, and Tae-jun could feel the tension coming off her, the way you feel heat coming off something that has been burning for a long time. Hyun-woo reached into his pocket and pulled out a radio. He kept his eyes on Tae-jun. He pressed the transmit. Alpha team. Hold position. Elevator lobby. Wait for my signal. He released the transmit. Waited. The radio crackled back with a 2-click acknowledgement. Start talking, Hyun-woo said. Not here, Tae-jun said. In the vehicle. You're not getting in that vehicle. Then we're not talking. He met Hyun-woo's eyes without blinking. You drove this operation 14 months, and you got to tonight with nothing. I'm offering you something that gets you further in the next 10 minutes than 14 months of theater got you. You can take it, or you can stand in this garage until your team upstairs triggers a response that brings every law enforcement agency in Manhattan to this building. Your choice. Hyun-woo stared at him. The thing Tae-jun had learned very early in his life, in rooms far more dangerous than this one, was that the moment of maximum leverage was never when you had the gun. It was when the other person wasn't sure you didn't have something worse. Hyun-woo took a step to the right, clearing the path to the SUV. If you attempt to drive out of this structure, Hyun-woo said, my men have access to every exit ramp. I know, Tae-jun said. I'm not driving anywhere. He put his hand at the center of Nia's back and moved her toward the vehicle. She didn't lean into the pressure, but she moved with it, and he felt in that small cooperation the enormous effort it was costing her to keep herself together, to stay functional, to keep thinking, to be here in this body, in this moment instead of somewhere else where none of tonight had happened. The armored SUV unlocked when he touched the key fob. He opened the rear door and Nia got in. He got in beside her. The door closed with the soft, pressurized thud of something built to absorb violence. Inside, the sounds of the garage dropped away. The interior smelled like leather and the faint metallic trace of the vehicle's armored construction. The windows were tinted dark enough that the men outside became silhouettes. Nia sat with her hands in her lap. She was looking straight ahead at the back of the front seat. Her profile in the dim light was composed and shattered simultaneously, which Tae-jun had not previously understood, was a thing a human face could be. Your palms, he said. I know. She didn't look at them. He reached across the center console into the storage pocket and found the first aid kit his head of security insisted on keeping in every vehicle. Put it in the space between them. She looked at it. Then she looked at him. The thing you said, she said quietly, about his father's operation. What you know about it. He said nothing. Was that real, she said. A beat. Was real enough, he said. She turned back to the front. Outside, Hyun-woo had come around to the driver's side window and was standing there with his arms at his sides, waiting. Going to figure out, you don't have what you implied you have, she said. I have some of it. And when he figures out the rest was a bluff, by then we need to have different leverage. He looked at her. You photographed the documents. Everything in the compartment. She went still. Nia. Yes, she said quietly, everything. And I copied the text thread from the burner before I put the phone back. He looked at her for a long moment. We reached into her blazer pocket, the blazer she'd been carrying crumpled in her arm since they left the archives, and produced her personal phone. She held it up without looking at him. He took it carefully, like it was something breakable. He opened the photo gallery. scrolled through. She had been thorough methodical in a way that shouldn't have been possible for someone in the state she'd been in when he found her on that archive room floor. Every document photographed straight on, in focus. The text thread captured in overlapping screenshots, so nothing was cut off. He looked at her again. "You said you didn't know what to do," he said. "I didn't." She finally looked at him. Her eyes were dry now, which somehow made them harder to look at directly. "But I did it anyway." He understood then, sitting in the armored quiet of the SUV with Hyun-woo's shadow falling across the window, what had been sitting in his chest since the moment he walked into the archives room and found her on the floor. She had known tonight might cost her everything. She had known she was walking toward a building that might become her grave. She had come back anyway. Not for the job. Not out of obligation. The window beside Tae-jun darkened further as Hyun-woo leaned down to look through the tinted glass. Waiting, getting impatient. The balance they'd established in the garage was already beginning to erode. Tae-jun could feel it the way you feel a current under still water. "I'm going to open the window," he said, in 30 seconds. "When I do, let me talk. Don't correct anything I say. Don't confirm anything. Don't deny anything. What are you going to say?" "I'm going to tell him that you have a copy of everything, stored somewhere he can't reach, set to transfer automatically if you don't reset a timer every 12 hours. She blinked. "You do now," he said, "as far as he knows." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded, once, and turned to face the window. He pressed the button, and the glass slid down 2 inches. Hyun-woo crouched slightly to look through the gap. His face in the slice of garage light was composed and hard and younger than Tae-jun had registered before. Mid-30s, maybe. Someone who had been raised inside the specific pressure of a powerful father's expectations and had come out of it not broken but sharpened in all the wrong directions. "You have 30 seconds of my patience left," Hyun-woo said. "Your father's operating accounts in the Cayman structure were flagged by a correspondent bank 18 days ago," Tae-jun said. "Not federal. Private audit. The kind that doesn't generate public record, but does generate a paper trail that leads to the actual ownership structure." He let that sit. "Your father doesn't know yet. The flag was buried in a compliance report that hasn't reached his desk. By my estimate, he has approximately 10 days before someone on his internal team surfaces it." Hyun-woo's jaw tightened. "The woman beside me has documentation that, forwarded to the right correspondent bank contacts, accelerates that timeline to 48 hours. Tae-jun continued. "She also has material that connects your father's part into 3 separate contracts in the past 18 months that your father has been working very hard to keep." The silence outside the window was complete. "She has a dead man switch," Tae-jun said. "Automated. 12-hour reset. You take either of us out of this garage in a way that doesn't involve us walking out under our own power, the reset doesn't happen." He held Hyun-woo's gaze through the 2-inch gap, and everything your father has spent 30 years building becomes very complicated, very fast. Hyun-woo stared at him, and Tae-jun watched the point of no return arrive in real time, the moment when a man realizes that the operation he came in to execute has turned inside out, and that the only moves still available to him will cost more than the moves he'd planned. "This isn't over," Hyun-woo said. "No," Tae-jun said. "It isn't." He pressed the button, and the window slid back up, and in the sealed quiet of the armored vehicle, Naya pressed the back of her hand against her mouth, and finally, silently, let herself shake. Naya stopped shaking after about 4 minutes. Not because it passed naturally, because she made it stop. Tae-jun watched her do it. He watched her press both palms flat against her thighs, take 3 slow breaths through her nose, and methodically reassemble herself the way someone reassembles a dislocated joint, with full knowledge of exactly how much it hurts, and the decision to do it anyway. Outside, Hyun-woo had moved away from the vehicle. He was standing 20 feet back with his 2 men, speaking in low tones, his back to the SUV. Tae-jun watched the body language, the slight forward lean of someone recalculating, the way one of the flanking men kept glancing toward the exit ramp, the particular stillness of a group that has just been told its next move is not what it thought. "He's calling someone," Nia said. She was watching through the tinted window, her voice completely steady now, flat and precise. "Not the team upstairs. He's on a different phone." Tae-jun had noticed the same thing. Hyun-woo had produced a second he used for the radio, so not the one he'd used for the radio, a different one, and was holding it to his ear with the particular tension of someone making a call they'd hoped they wouldn't have to make. His father, Tae-jun, said, or a handler, same thing. Naya turned from the window and opened the first aid kit sitting between them. She did it without ceremony. Without asking for anything, just opened it, found the antiseptic wipes, and started cleaning her right palm. She made no sound when the antiseptic hit the torn skin. Her jaw tightened once and then released. "The dead man's switch," she said while she worked. "We need it to actually exist." "I know. My phone is unlocked. If you can get a message to anyone outside this building." "Do-yun," he said. Park Do-yun, his head of security, who should have been unreachable tonight off rotation. No scheduled assignments. But Do-yun had a protocol for signals that didn't go through standard channels, a system they'd built after a security breach 3 years ago that had nearly cost 2 of Tae-jun's lieutenants their lives. "I activated the signal when I found you in the archives. Through the watch." He paused. "He'll be moving already. I don't know his timeline. So we're buying time." "We're buying time." She nodded, wrapped gauze around her right palm, and switched to the left hand without pausing. He watched her work and found himself paying attention to the wrongness of it, the way she was sitting in an armored vehicle in a parking garage at midnight cleaning her own wounds, while the man who had systematically dismantled her life stood 20 feet away on a phone call. The gap between what was happening to her and the composure she was maintaining over it was wide enough to fall into. "The information I used," he said, "about the correspondent bank flag, the Cayman accounts, was it real?" "Partially." He watched Hyun-woo's back. "The flag is real. The timeline may be slightly compressed." "How slightly?" "The 10 days may be closer to 30. And the documents I photographed, do they actually connect to the contracts you mentioned?" He was quiet for a moment. "Some of them," he said. "The text thread you copied, if it reaches the right people, it creates problems for CO's network. Real problems, but not the immediate collapse I implied." She tied off the gauze on her left palm, set the first aid kit aside, looked at her hands for a moment, the white gauze, the dark garage light, the faint trembling she was still fighting. "So we have leverage," she said. "Just not as much as he thinks." "Correct. Then we need him to not find that out in the next." She glanced toward the window where Hyun-woo was still on his call. "However long we have." "Correct." She turned to look at him directly. In the dim interior light, her face was exhausted and alert simultaneously. The particular combinations that comes from adrenaline running longer than a body was designed to sustain. "What do you actually know about his father's operation?" she said. "Not the bluff. The real part." Tae-jun looked at her. He did not typically answer questions like that. In 11 years of running Kang Meridian Group, he had developed the habit of compartmentalizing information so thoroughly that even his closest people knew only what they absolutely needed to know, because information given was information that could be taken. He looked at Naya Holloway, who had come back to a building she knew was a target because she would not leave him without warning, and he made a decision. CO Minchul has been laundering operating capital through 3 shell structures in Singapore, the Caymans, and one in Luxembourg that most people don't know exists, he said. The Luxembourg entity is the one that matters. It's the one connected to the contracts. The one that would, if exposed, create problems not just for his finances, but for his relationships with people in Seoul. He cannot afford to lose. How do you know about Luxembourg? Because 18 months ago, one of CO's people tried to defect to my organization, and I declined to take him in. But I kept what he told me before I sent him away. Naya stared at him. You have that information, and you've been sitting on it for 18 months. I had no reason to use it until tonight. Until tonight. She was quiet for a moment, processing then. Is it documented? The Luxembourg connection? Not in my possession. In the possession of someone in Singapore who owes me a significant debt and has been waiting for a request that hasn't come. Call in the debt, she said immediately. Tonight. If Do-yun is moving, if you can get a message out. It's the middle of the morning in Singapore. Wake them up. He looked at her. There was a version of this conversation he'd expected to have, the version where he managed the situation. And she was a variable to be protected. This was not that conversation. This This was a woman who was 3 moves ahead of where he'd put her and was looking at him with the calm, focused expression of someone who intends to be useful. He took her phone. He sent a message through an encrypted channel Tae-jun monitored at all hours, using a phrase that would communicate the essentials: location, threat level, and the Singapore contact. 14 words total. He sent it and put the phone down and waited. Outside, Hyunwoo ended his call. He stood for a moment with his back still to the SUV. Then he turned around. He walked back toward the vehicle with a different quality of movement than before. Something settled, decided. The recalculation was complete. Tae-jun felt it before Hyunwoo reached the window. Whatever call he'd just made had changed the balance. Hyunwoo knocked twice on the glass. Tae-jun lowered the window the same 2 inches. New terms, Hyunwoo said. His voice had gone quiet in a way that was more dangerous than loud. You and I go upstairs alone. Your secretary stays in the vehicle with my men. No, Tae-jun said. It wasn't a negotiation. You have 2 men on the ground and a team upstairs that can't move without your signal, Tae-jun said. I have a dead man's switch on a 12-hour clock. This is still a negotiation. Hyunwoo looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked past Tae-jun at Nia. The switch is real, Hyunwoo said. It was not a question. Nia met his gaze through the 2-inch gap without flinching. Would you like to find out? Hyunwoo's eyes stayed on her for 3 full seconds. Then he took 1 step back from the window and said, Both of you. Upstairs now. Why? Tae-jun said. Because my father wants to speak with you directly. He held up the second phone screen facing outward. A video call, active, the screen showing a dark room and a man seated in what appeared to be dim lamplight. He's been listening for the past 4 minutes. The cold that moved through Tae-jun's chest was not fear. It was the specific sensation of understanding that the landscape had changed while he was looking at something else. He took the phone. The man on the screen was in his late 60s, heavy through the shoulders, gray at the temples, with the particular quality of stillness that belonged to men who had decades making decisions that ended other people's lives. Seo Min-chul's looked exactly like the photographs. Tae-jun had studied, in fact, over the course of 11 years, except for the eyes. Photographs never quite got the eyes right. Tae-jun, Seo said. His Korean was precise and unhurried. It's been a long time. Tae-jun did not answer in Korean. You had your son sleep with my employee, he said in English. For 8 months. Hyunwoo is very dedicated, Seo said, without particular inflection. He's sitting in my parking garage at midnight because the operation went sideways. Operations adapt. Seo moved slightly in his chair, a small repositioning that brought more of his face into the light. You're still alive. He's still standing. The night isn't finished. The dead man's switch is a bluff, Seo said. The garage was very quiet. She photographed documents, Seo continued. That's confirmed my son saw the phone, saw the photos before he realized she'd found the compartment. What she photographed is damaging but not fatal. And the text thread. A pause. The burner was programmed to wipe remotely after confirmation of contact. The thread she copied is gone from the source. What's on her phone is the only copy, and it's incomplete because the wipe initiated before she finished copying. Another pause, smaller. We know because the wipe confirmation came back 14 minutes after she found the phone. We've known since then what she has and doesn't have. Tae-jun kept his face still. The Luxembourg entity you mentioned, Seo said, came from a defector. One of mine 3 years ago. I know who he was and I know what he knew. What he knew was incomplete because I made sure it was incomplete before I let him go. The old man's voice carried no particular satisfaction. Whatever you've been holding for 18 months is a partial picture with no documentary support, impressive as a bluff, useless as actual leverage. The silence that followed was the kind that tells you what you're really working with. In 11 years, Tae-jun had never been outmaneuvered this cleanly. He understood with the cold, clinical clarity of a man who had built his entire life on reading situations correctly that Seo Min-chul had not been running a 14-month operation to steal financial data. He'd been running a 14-month operation to get Tae-jun into exactly this position. Tonight, this garage, this conversation. The financial intelligence was never the point. What do you actually want? Tae-jun said. Cooperation, Seo said. A formal arrangement between our organizations. Shared territories, shared infrastructure, shared channels. A merger, effectively, under terms we negotiate in good faith. He tilted his head slightly. I don't want to destroy you, Tae-jun. You're too valuable to destroy. I want to own you. Nia made a sound beside him. Not a word, just the involuntary breath of someone who has understood something terrible. Tae-jun turned to look at her. She was staring at the phone screen. Her face had gone through several things in rapid succession and landed on something she was working hard to contain. He's going to use me, she said. Her voice was barely above a murmur, meant for Tae-jun only. The baby. That's the piece. That's what your leverage actually is. Tae-jun looked at the phone screen. Seo Min-chul was watching them both with the patient, attentive expression of someone who has arranged a room and is now waiting for the pilot to discover the arrangement. Hyun-woo's child, Tae-jun said. My grandchild, Seo said quietly, on the screen. Nia closed her eyes. 1 second, too. She opened them. You planned this from the beginning, she said. Her voice came out steady but with underneath it a vibration like a structure that is still standing but has lost what was holding it together. Not just Evan, not just the intelligence operation. The baby was always part of the plan. Hyun-woo made a judgment call, Seo said. He seemed to be choosing not to confirm or deny the specific sequencing. He tampered with my contraception, she said. Seo Min-chul looked at her through the phone screen for a long moment. His expression didn't change. You were collateral, he said simply. You became something else. The word collateral landed in the vehicle like a dropped weight. Nia sat very still. Tae-jun watched something happen to her face that he had no language for, something that moved through a wave, something that started with the eyes and traveled through the jaw and the throat and the set of her shoulders. It was not grief, exactly, though it contained grief. It was the expression of a person discovering how small they were in someone else's architecture, how completely they had been accounted for and arranged without their knowledge. You're going to want me to care, she said finally. Her voice had gone almost toneless. She was speaking to the screen. About the child, you're going to use that. Seo said nothing. He didn't need to. Then you don't know me, she said. Because the only thing I care about right now is that child never having anything to do with any of this. That's not your decision to make, Seo said. Watch me. Hyun-woo opened the vehicle door. He moved faster than Tae-jun had tracked. Because Tae-jun had been focused on the screen, pulling the rear door open and stepping back with his weapon leveled. The garage air flooded in cold and smelling of exhaust. Out, Hyun-woo said. Both of you now. Tae-jun moved. He got out of the vehicle on the driver's side, coming around the front, watching the angles. The two flanking men had repositioned, they'd moved while the conversation was happening, quiet and disciplined. The exit ramp on the north side had a third man visible now, one he hadn't counted before. Someone who'd come down from upstairs during the phone call. He'd been managing 2 flanking men and a team on the floors above. He was managing 4 confirmed and an unknown number above. Nia came around the passenger side. She stood beside the front bumper with her bandaged hands at her sides and looked at Hyun-woo with the clear, steady expression of someone who has been taken apart completely and is waiting to find out what they're made of underneath. There was never going to be a negotiation, Tae-jun said to Hyun-woo. There's going to be one now, Hyun-woo said. Just not the kind you were hoping for. Your father wants a merger. My father wants your network intact and your cooperation voluntary enough that the operational transition doesn't create instability. Hyun-woo lowered the weapon slightly, not all the way. Not a gesture of goodwill, just a repositioning. He doesn't need you dead. He needs you manageable. And if I'm not manageable... Hyun-woo looked at Nia. Tae-jun went very still. Don't, he said, one word. Quiet. She's carrying family, Hyun-woo said. The word family in his mouth sounded like a transaction. My father's grandson. That changes the math. She has nothing to do with... She has everything to do with it. Hyun-woo's voice went harder. That wasn't an accident, Tae-jun. None of this was an accident. She was chosen because of her proximity to you. She was maintained because of her access to you. The pregnancy was accelerated because a child creates obligations that can't be dissolved. He paused. My father is a patient man. He builds things that last. Nia's breathing was audible, now controlled, deliberate, a conscious act. Her hands at her sides had closed into loose fists, the bandaged palms pressing against her fingers. She looked at Tae-jun. He looked at her. There was something that's passed between them in that look, that had no words and didn't need them an acknowledgement of where they were. What had just been confirmed, and what the real shape of this situation actually was. They had been playing a hand they thought was short, but salvageable. The hand had just been revealed as empty. And then Naya's phone, the one Tae-jun had used to send the message which he'd left on the seat of the SUV, began to buzz. All of them heard it. Hyunwoo looked toward the vehicle. So did both flanking men. 2 seconds. That was all. Tae-jun moved. Not toward the men, toward the phone. He turned, pulled the rear door open, grabbed the phone off the seat. The message on the screen was from Do-yoon's channel. 4 words, in position, say when. He pressed the door closed. Turned back. Hyunwoo had his weapon fully raised again. Both flanking men were covering him. The man on the exit ramp had moved 2 steps closer. Put it down, Hyunwoo said. Tae-jun did not put it down. He stood in the cold garage air and looked at Seo Hyunwoo, the son of the man who had spent 14 months building a trap around. A woman who had never done anything except be good at her job and trust the wrong person. And he made the calculation that he had been making and remaking since 1147p. The calculation was not about territory or networks or organizational mergers. It was about the woman standing 3 feet to his left with bandaged hands and a child she had not asked for. And what it meant that she had come back tonight, and what it cost to be the kind of person she was in a world built by people like the man on that phone screen. He looked at the phone. At Do-yoon's 4 words, he looked at Hyunwoo. You have a team upstairs, Tae-jun said. I have a team outside. Hyunwoo went very still. The signal I activated was not just for communication, Tae-jun said. It was a perimeter call. Every man Do-yoon can move on short notice has been moving since 1150p. He held up the phone. He is currently in position. In position means nothing. It means you have about 90 seconds before the exits to this structure are covered by people who have been working for me for a combined total of 40 years and who are not, I want to be clear, operating under instructions to bring anyone in alive. The flanking men looked at each other. Hyunwoo's jaw tightened. You're bluffing. Again. Tae-jun typed 2 words into the message thread and sent them. From somewhere above them, from the level of the street, or possibly the ramp, or possibly both, there was the sound of movement. Not gunfire. Not yet. Just the particular sound of a coordinated group taking position, the creak of a stairwell door, the low crackle of a radio cut short, the shift of bodies in the dark above the concrete ramp. Hyunwoo heard it. His 2 men heard it. The man on the exit ramp turned around and then stopped moving, which told Tae-jun everything about what he'd seen when he turned. The garage phone, the landline, on the concrete pillar near the ramp attendant station, which had not rung once all night, began to ring. Nobody moved. It rang 4 times. Hyunwoo's left hand moved toward his second phone. His eyes did not leave Tae-jun. The ramp phone stopped ringing. In the silence that followed, Naya said, very quietly, to no one in particular, he's going to run. Hyunwoo's eyes cut to her. She met his gaze without blinking. You've been calling your father for instructions this whole time. He's not going to send backup. Not to a domestic location. Not tonight. Not with this much exposure. He's going to cut the operation and tell you to extract, and you know it. A pause. Because you've seen him do it before. The thing that moved through Hyunwoo's face in the next 2 seconds was not anger. It was recognition. The specific, involuntary recognition of a person whose most private knowledge has just been spoken aloud by someone who had no right to know it. You don't know what you're talking about, he said. You did everything right, she said. Her voice had taken on a quality Tae-jun had not heard from her before, quiet, almost gentle, but with a cut underneath it. 14 months. You were perfect. You made me feel like the luckiest person in the room every time you walked into it, and you did it so well that I never once. Her voice wavered, and she steadied it, but it still went wrong. And now he's going to blame you for that. Not the operation. You, because that's what he does. Hyunwoo stared at her. I read the messages, she said. The thread on the burner, before the wipe. All of them. Not just the last one. She looked at him steadily. I know what he calls you when an operation doesn't close. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. Hyunwoo's weapon dropped 3 inches. Not all the way. 3 inches. It was enough to tell Tae-jun that something real had just happened in the space between them, something unscripted, something that had nothing to do with leverage or dead man switches or organizational mergers. Then Hyunwoo's second phone buzzed in his hand. He looked at the screen. Whatever he read there, it put the weapon back up immediately. He looked at Tae-jun with an expression that had gone flat and final and resolved in the specific way of a man who has just received orders he doesn't agree with and is going to follow them anyway because the alternative is worse. New instructions, Hyunwoo said. Tae-jun waited. My father is expanding the mandate. His voice was even practiced, the voice of someone delivering information they have separated themselves from. Nia Holloway is no longer collateral. She's primary. The word primary sat in the cold air of the garage like a physical object. He wants her and the child secured at a location he controls, Hyunwoo continued. As incentive for your cooperation. He looked at Nia, and for one fraction of a second, something moved through his eyes that was not strategic and not calculated, something that looked, briefly, like a man who had been doing a job for so long he had forgotten what it was costing him. I'm sorry, he said. Nia stared at him. That's real, she said. Isn't it? He didn't answer. Hyunwoo. Her voice was almost a whisper. He looked away from her and raised the weapon toward Tae-jun. Tell Do-yeon to stand down, he said, or this ends differently than either of us wants. Tae-jun looked at the weapon, at Hyunwoo's face behind it, sploos, at the two flanking men who were watching their principal with the particular attention of people who are waiting to see whether the man in charge is going to hold or break. He looked at Nia. She was looking back at him. And in her eyes, underneath everything the night had cost her, the manufactured love, the deliberate pregnancy, the revelation of exactly how small she'd been in Seo Min-chul's architecture was something that had not been there when he found her on the archive room floor. Not fear, not surrender. The specific, quiet, load-bearing look of a person who has decided they are not going to let this be the thing that breaks them, and who is waiting to see whether the person standing beside them has decided the same. Tae-jun turned back to Hyunwoo, lifted the phone, and instead of calling Do-yeon off, he held up the screen so Hyunwoo could see what he was typing. 3 words. Take them down. The first shot came from the exit ramp. Not at Hyunwoo, not at Tae-jun. A controlled double tap aimed at the overhead fluorescent panel above the ramp attendant station, killing the last functioning light source on the garage's north side and plunging that entire quadrant into darkness thick enough to walk into. Do-yeon's people didn't announce themselves. They never did. The flanking man on Tae-jun's left reacted wrong. He turned toward the sound, which meant he turned away from his principal, which was the exact mistake a trained man was not supposed to make, and which told something about how long it had been since Seo's ground team had worked under real pressure. Tae-jun was already moving when the light died. He went left and low, not away from Hyunwoo but toward him, closing the distance between them from 15 feet to 6 in the time it took the flanking man to realize his error and start to correct it. Hyunwoo fired. The shot went wide. Tae-jun had changed his angle mid-movement, dropping his shoulder, and the round sparked off the concrete pillar 2 feet behind where his head had been. The muzzle flash lit the garage in a single white frame like a photograph. Hyunwoo's face behind the weapon, teeth showing, the flanking men scrambling, the far side of the ramp filling with moving shapes that were Do-yeon's people coming down fast and silent. Tae-jun hit Hyunwoo at the midsection. Not a tackle, a driving collision, shoulder into sternum, the kind of impact that doesn't require skill so much as commitment. Hyunwoo was bigger than he looked and absorbed it, better than Tae-jun expected, stumbling back 3 steps but not going down, one hand coming up to find the back of Tae-jun's collar and wrench. They went sideways together into the hood of a parked sedan, metal crumpling under the combined weight, and Tae-jun heard the gun skitter across the concrete, somewhere in the dark. From his left he heard Nia's voice, not a scream. A sharp command, down, get down, and then the garage erupted. Not chaos. Controlled violence is never chaos, but it moves too fast for any single mind to track. Do-yeon had brought 6 men through the north ramp and 2 more through the service corridor. Tae-jun and Nia had come through earlier. Tae-jun knew this because he'd helped design the protocol and because he could hear the positioning even while. Hyunwoo's elbow found his jaw and made his vision wide out for 1 full second. He tasted blood. bit his tongue on impact. He grabbed Hyun-woo's arm before the second elbow could land and turned into the hold, using the momentum, rather than fighting it, and brought them both around, so Hyun-woo's back was against the sedan's hood. The younger man was strong, genuinely strong, not the maintained gym strength of someone who worked out for aesthetics, but the functional, angry strength of someone who had been trained for situations exactly like this one, and was now operating on the specific fuel of an operation falling apart around him. His knee came up. Tae-jun twisted away from it and took the impact on the outer thigh instead of the groin painful enough to make him grunt, not disabling. He got one hand into Hyun-woo's collar and used the grip to slam the back of his head against the sedan hood once hard. The sound it made was the sound of someone's careful plan hitting something solid. Hyun-woo went briefly limp. Not unconscious, just the involuntary muscle dropout of a brain that has just absorbed impact. A second was enough. Tae-jun stepped back, breathing hard, and got his bearings. The north side of the garage was a working scene now, Do-yoon's team moving through the dark in practiced pairs, the flanking men either down or in the process of being managed, the sounds of struggle concentrated and professional and moving toward conclusion. The man who'd been on the exit ramp was already on the floor, with two of Do-yoon's people standing over him. Naya. He turned. She was pressed against the armored SUV's rear quarter panel, low, arms wrapped around herself, watching the garage with the wide-eyed, alert stillness of someone who has had enough training in crisis management to know the most dangerous thing you can do in an active situation is move without knowing what you're moving toward. She was watching him. When she saw him turn, she gave him one short nod. "I'm here, I'm functional. Don't stop what you're doing for me." Hyun-woo came off the sedan hood. He hadn't found the gun. He wasn't trying to. He'd apparently made a rapid calculation that the gun was lost in the dark, and that looking for it was less useful than the alternative, which was the 6 inches of blade he'd produced from somewhere on his person, and was now holding, with the blade down, the grip of someone who had been taught to use it properly. Tae-jun had nothing. His own weapon was in his office upstairs in the building that was currently occupied by an unknown number of CO's tactical team. He had his hands and the car and the concrete pillar 3 feet to his right. "Call them off," Hyun-woo said. He was breathing hard, his voice rough at the edges. A thin line of blood was tracking from his hairline where his head had hit the sedan, not serious hits, but visible, and it seemed to have moved something in him from strategic to personal. "Call them off right now." "It's done," Tae-jun said. "Your men are all ready. I don't care about my men." Hyun-woo took one step forward. The blade was very steady. "Call them off and let me walk out of here. You can walk out of here without the knife." "That's not how this works." "That's exactly how this works." Tae-jun kept his eyes on the blade and his voice level. "Your father gave you a mandate that exposed your entire operation and ended with you in a parking garage, holding a knife on a man whose people just took your team apart. You let me walk out of this building tonight, and you call your father and tell him the operation is salvageable with a different approach. My father does not get told the operation failed. Then tell him it's paused. There is no paused." Hyun-woo's voice cracked on the last word, not from emotion, from exertion, the controlled breathing of someone maintaining physical readiness. "There is completed or there is failed, and I have been failing this for 14 months, because somewhere between the intelligence and the execution." He stopped. His jaw tightened. He started again. "Because she was not supposed to find the compartment." Tae-jun went very still. 8 months, Hyun-woo said. 8 months, and she didn't ask a single question. I didn't have an answer for. She was. He stopped again. The knife didn't waver, but something behind his eyes did. She was exactly what the profile said she would be, and she was nothing like it at all, and I had... His breath came out hard through his nose. I had what I needed 3 months in. The passwords. Access patterns. The financial routing. I had it. And I kept going. Tae-jun heard that, filed it. Did not look at Nia. "Because I needed the full architecture," Hyun-woo said. But the answer came out half a second too slow, and with slightly too much structure, the cadence of a prepared answer rather than a true one, and Tae-jun been listening to people tell him half-truths for too many years to miss it. He didn't push, not with the knife still up. "Do-yun," Tae-jun said, not loudly, just enough to carry in the concrete space. "Here." Do-yun's voice came from the darkness on the north side. Calm, unhurried. "What's the count?" 4 down, 2 secured. The team upstairs received a recall signal 6 minutes ago. A brief pause. They're gone. Building's clear. Hyunwoo heard that. His eyes moved a quick sweep of the garage, reading the same information from the sounds and the quality of the dark that Tae-jun had already read. The calculation was visible. 4 down, 2 secured, team recalled. He was standing in a garage with a knife and no operational backup, and a man whose people had just taken apart everything around him in under 8 minutes. The knife came down, not dropped lowered, deliberately with control. He set it on the sedan hood behind him with the particular precision of a man who is choosing to end something in a specific way. Then he straightened up and looked at Tae-jun with an expression that was, for the first time since the garage, entirely without performance. "What happens now?" he said. "Now you sit down," Tae-jun said. Hyunwoo sat down on the concrete next to the sedan. Not because he was told to, or not only because, but because his body had apparently been running on something that the lowering of the knife had interrupted, and without it he was a man who had been awake for too long, making too many decisions under too much pressure. And the concrete was right there. Do-yun materialized from the north side of the garage. He was a compact man, 51, with a particular economy of movement of someone who had long since stopped doing anything with his body that wasn't intentional. He looked at Hyunwoo on the floor, at Tae-jun breathing hard with blood on his lip, at the state of the garage, and produced no visible reaction to any of it. "You're bleeding," he said to Tae-jun. "I know, your lip." "I know, Do-yun." Do-yun looked at Nia. "Are you injured?" "My hands," she said. She had come around the rear of the SUV. She was standing with her arms at her sides, again the bandaged palms visible, her clothes dusty from the maintenance shaft, and her face carrying everything the night had cost her in a way she was no longer trying to conceal. "I'm fine otherwise." Do-yun looked at her for one moment with an expression that was not sympathy exactly. Do-yun didn't traffic in sympathy but recognition. The specific recognition of someone who has seen what people look like after they have been through something real and is acknowledging that he is seeing it now. "There's a medical kit in the second vehicle," he said. "I already used the one in his," she said. "The second one is better." She almost smiled. It didn't quite make it. "Okay." Do-yun looked back at Tae-jun. "The building is clear. But we have a window, whatever triggered the recall on his team upstairs. It's temporary. Someone is coming back. Whether that's more of his people or an actual federal response to the power outage. How long? 40 minutes. Maybe less." Tae-jun looked at Hyunwoo on the floor. Then he walked to where Hyunwoo's gun had skittered during the collision and found it under the front bumper of the parked sedan, 3 feet away. He picked it up, checked the chamber, and came back. He crouched down to Hyunwoo's level. "Your phone," he said. Hyunwoo looked at him. "The one you used to call your father." Pause. Then Hyunwoo reached into his pocket and held it out. Tae-jun took it. The call log was still open, the most recent outgoing call. 18 minutes, the number a string of digits with no country code prefix that he didn't recognize. He photographed the screen with Nia's phone, which Do-yun had retrieved and handed over, then pocketed both devices. "The Luxembourg account," Tae-jun said. Hyunwoo looked at him with the flat, careful expression of someone choosing their words. "Your father told you the defector's information was incomplete," Tae-jun said. "He was right. But he was right because he made sure the defector only had partial access." He held Hyunwoo's gaze, "which means someone inside your father's organization had full access. Someone who architected the Luxembourg structure and who is still inside that organization right now." Hyunwoo's breathing changed. A small thing, almost nothing, but Tae-jun caught it. "You know who it is," Tae-jun said. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You were running this operation for 14 months, Tae-jun said. "Your father gave you the operational architecture. You built the field execution, which means you saw the financial flows that were funding Hyunwoo's cover life in New York. You saw where the money came from." He paused. "Did it come from the Luxembourg entity?" Hyunwoo said nothing, because if it did, Tae-jun continued. "Then someone inside your father's organization knew about this operation at a level of detail that didn't need to go through the Luxembourg structure. Which means the Luxembourg entity exists for something your father doesn't want directly connected to the operational accounts." He watched Hyunwoo's face. Something he's hiding from his own people. The concrete was cold under their feet. Somewhere above them, the storm was still pressing down on Manhattan, though whether it had eased or intensified, Tae-jun couldn't tell from down here. The garage had gone very quiet. Do-yun's men were holding position, waiting. The two secured members of Hyun-woo's team were somewhere in the dark, dealt with. You're guessing, Hyun-woo said. Some of it, Tae-jun said. Not all of it. What do you want? Right now? I want you to tell me what the Luxembourg entity actually funds. Hyun-woo looked at the floor between his feet. He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Tae-jun began to calculate alternative approaches, and then Hyun-woo said, without looking up, politicians. The word sat there. Seoul, Hyun-woo said, 3 members of the National Assembly. 1 in the Ministry of Justice. He paused. 1 federal prosecutor's office here. New York District. He finally looked up. The Luxembourg entity exists because those relationships cannot be connected to SEO organization accounts under any circumstances. The exposure isn't financial. It's political. Tae-jun absorbed that. Do-yun, standing 6 feet back, had gone very still. The federal prosecutor, Tae-jun said carefully, has been managing any investigation that comes within range of my father's American operations for 4 years, Hyun-woo said. Every federal inquiry that looked like it might get close, redirected, narrowed, killed before it developed. Not obviously. Carefully. He looked at the floor again. I found out about it 8 months in. I wasn't supposed to. The financial flows through the Luxembourg structure run through a Singapore correspondent and the Singapore contact. He stopped. The contact you owe a debt to, Nia said from behind Tae-jun. Both men looked at her. She was standing 6 feet back, arms crossed, watching Hyun-woo with an expression that was calm in the way that things are calm when there is too much underneath them to let any of it show. The Singapore correspondent, she said to Tae-jun. The one you said you were going to call in the debt from tonight. That's the connection to the Luxembourg entity. She looked at Hyun-woo, which is why your father told you the defector's information was incomplete. Because the person who could complete it is in Singapore. And your father didn't know Tae-jun had a relationship with that contact. The silence that followed was the specific silence of information locking into place. Hyun-woo stared at her. You did finance and accounting, he said slowly, before Kang Meridian Group. 4 years of corporate treasury management, she said. And I've been running financial administration for a multi-entity international organization for 4 more. She looked at him steadily. I understand how money moves. I understand what shell structures are built to hide. And I understand that what you just described is not a financial crime. It's a political crisis for 2 governments. Yes, Hyun-woo said. And your father knows that if that information reaches the right people, ends him, Hyun-woo said simply, not operationally, personally. Everything he built, everything he stopped. His voice had gone somewhere harder and less controlled. Everything I was supposed to inherit. The garage was very quiet. Tae-jun stood up from his crouch. His thigh ached from the knee, impact the deep muscular ache that would be brutal tomorrow and was distracting now. His lip had stopped bleeding, but the copper taste was still there. He looked at Hyun-woo on the floor and felt something that was not sympathy and was not contempt, something more complicated and less useful than either. Do-yun, he said. The Singapore contact is already responding, Do-yun said. He was holding his own phone, screen facing Tae-jun. Message came in 3 minutes ago. He's prepared to transfer documentation on request. He wants a conversation before he does. Tonight, he's been awake. Apparently he's been waiting for this call for a while. Tae-jun took the phone. Read the message. Then he looked at Nia. I need your phone. She handed it over without asking why. He opened her photo gallery, pulled up the photograph she'd taken of Hyun-woo's hidden documents and the text thread, and forwarded the complete file to Do-yun's encrypted channel. What are you doing? Hyun-woo said. He'd gotten to his feet sometime in the last minute, quietly, while Tae-jun was reading. He was standing against the sedan, watching. Building the complete picture, Tae-jun said. The Singapore for documentation covers the Luxembourg entity. Your father's phone records. He held up the device he'd taken from Hyun-woo. Cover the operational chain. Naya's photographs cover the tactical documents and the assassination mandate. Hyun-woo's eyes tracked between the phones. You're going to use it. Yes. Against my father, against everything your father built, that is going to come back at me if I leave it standing. Tae-jun's voice was even, without drama. Not a threat, a statement of engineering. He sent his son to manufacture a pregnancy in a woman who worked for me. He sent a tactical team to put me in the ground and make it look federal. He has a prosecutor in New York managing investigations on his behalf. He paused. You tell me how I leave that standing. If you move against him directly. I'm not moving against him directly. Hyun-woo went still. Direct action creates noise, Tae-jun said. Noise creates attention. I don't need him hurt. I need him contained. He looked at Hyun-woo. The information goes to people who have use for it. People in Seoul who have been waiting for leverage on your father for a long time. Because your father has leverage on them, and the balance has never been comfortable. People in this city who would prefer a different arrangement with the federal prosecutor's office. He paused. When the right people have the right information, your father's organization doesn't collapse. It implodes. From inside. Without my name anywhere on the mechanism. Hyun-woo was quiet for a very long time. He'll know it was you, he said finally. He'll suspect. He won't be able to prove it, and he won't be in a position to act on it regardless. Tae-jun looked at him directly. Which brings us to you. What about me? I have a choice tonight that you didn't have an hour ago. Tae-jun held Hyun-woo's gaze. You can be the mechanism through which this happens. You know the contacts in Seoul. You know which members of the assembly your father has been managing. And you know what they're afraid of, because you've been in the room for that information, whether your father meant you to be or not. You walk away from this garage tonight with Do-yoon's people, and you help us complete the picture, and what happens to your father's operation happens without you inside it. And if I don't, then Do-yoon calls the contacts without you. It takes longer, and your father eventually figures out that the chain started here, tonight, with his son on the floor of a parking garage. He let that sit. The outcome is the same. Your level of involvement is the variable. Hyun-woo looked at him, at Nia back at him. You're offering me a deal, he said. I'm offering you a door, Tae-jun said. A deal implies I need something from you. I don't need it. I want it because it's faster and cleaner, and because the alternative takes time I don't have. The garage hummed. Water dripped. Somewhere above them, very faintly, thunder moved across the city. One more time a long, rolling sound that traveled the length of the building and faded. Nia spoke. The baby, she said. Both men looked at her. She was looking at Hyun-woo. Her voice was quiet and had no anger in it, or the anger was so deep underneath everything else that it had become structural, invisible the way foundations are invisible. Whatever you decide tonight, she said, whatever door you walk through, the baby has my last name. The baby has my life. Your father's interests and your father's organization and every plan that was ever made around that pregnancy. She stopped, took one breath. None of that comes near my child. Ever. Hyun-woo looked at her for a long time. Something moved across his face that was real, that had no strategy in it, no calculation, and that Tae-jun suspected Hyun-woo had been working very hard for 14 months to not let happen. I know, he said quietly. I need to hear you say it clearly. The child is yours, he said. I won't, his voice dropped. I won't bring anything near it. She held his gaze for 3 more seconds. Then she looked away. The moment closed. Tae-jun looked at Do-yoon. Get him out of here. Separate vehicle. I want 2 people with him at all times. And if he changes his mind, Do-yoon said, then we take more time and get the same result. Tae-jun looked at Hyun-woo. But I don't think he will. Hyun-woo said nothing. He pushed himself off the sedan and walked toward Do-yoon with the particular movement of a man who has reached the specific exhaustion that comes from fighting a battle he designed himself and losing it in every direction at once. Do-yoon gestured. 2 of his people fell into position, flanking Hyun-woo, without touching him, and the 3 of them moved toward the service corridor. Tae-jun watched them go. Then he turned to look at Nia. She was standing beside the SUV, with her back against the driver's door, and her head tilted, slightly back against the metal. Her eyes closed. Not asleep, just for a moment, done. Just for a handful of seconds, not performing anything for anyone. He stood there. He didn't speak. He didn't know what he would have said. He was a man who had spent his entire adult life in a world where everything had a price, and loyalty was a ledger item, and trust was an exposure he could not afford. A sound like green wood splitting, and he was standing in a parking garage at 1 a.m, looking at a woman who had come back to a building she knew might be her grave, because she would not abandon him. and he did not have adequate language for what that required of him in return. She opened her eyes. She looked at him. "Is it over?" she said. "Not yet." She nodded. She had known the answer before she asked it. "How long?" she said. "Hours." He thought about what Tae-jun needed, what the Singapore contact needed, what the information chain required to move from their possession to the people who would use it effectively. Maybe until morning. She looked at the ceiling of the garage, the low concrete overhead, the dead fluorescent fixtures, the pipes running along the structural beams. She was calculating something. He could see her doing it. "I need to sit somewhere," she said. "Somewhere that isn't a parking garage. Tae-jun has a location. I don't mean safe house," she said. "I mean somewhere that has chairs that aren't made of concrete and possibly—" Her voice did something at the edges, a wavering she shut down immediately. "Possibly some water that isn't from a pipe." He looked at her for a moment. "There's a location 3 blocks from here," he said. "Tae-jun keeps it off the books. Clean, secure. Does it have chairs?" "It has chairs." She pushed off the door and straightened up. She was still shaking, a fine, barely visible tremor running through her hands and her shoulders, the aftermath of too much adrenaline in a body that was also, underneath everything, managing a pregnancy in its early weeks, and the particular physical cost of a maintenance shaft descent and everything that had preceded and followed it. She picked up her crumpled blazer from where she'd dropped it against the tire. She shook it once and put it over her arm. She walked around to the passenger side of the SUV and stopped with her hand on the door. "Tae-jun," she said. "He turned. The Singapore contact," she said. "The documentation they're sending. It needs to reach the right people before morning." She looked at him across the roof of the vehicle. "Because if your timeline on CO's Cayman flag was wrong, if it's 30 days, instead of 10 you need the Luxembourg documentation in play tonight to replace that leverage." He looked at her. "I know," he said. "Do you have the contacts in Seoul?" "Some of them." "I may have one you don't." She said it without preamble, without explanation. "I worked corporate treasury in Seoul for 8 months before I came to New York. One of the firms I worked with had assembly connections. I didn't understand what that meant at the time." She held his gaze across the roof of the SUV. "I might understand it better now." The night around them was very quiet. Tae-jun looked at Nia Holloway, who had come back to a building she knew was a trap, who had photographed evidence in the minutes between discovering a betrayal and going into shock, who had read a financial structure in real time, in the back of an armored car, and kept pace with him through every development of the worst night either of them had ever survived, and understood with a clarity that had nothing to do with strategy, that the thing he had spent 11 years building his life around was not, in the end, the most dangerous thing in this garage. She was. "Get in the car," he said. She opened the door and got in. He got in the driver's side. Tae-jun was occupied, and the protocol for driving himself was something he hadn't done in years, but the muscle memory came back, like everything trained, deeply enough, came back, without thought, just present, and put the vehicle in gear. As he pulled toward the exit ramp, his phone buzzed once. A message from Tae-jun's channel. "Singapore package received. Authentication confirmed. It's everything. We have enough." He didn't read it aloud, but his hands on the wheel loosened by a fraction the specific release of a man who has been holding something very tightly and has just been told he can afford to hold it slightly less. The exit ramp rose ahead of them, wet concrete catching the SUV's headlights. Somewhere above, Manhattan was still drowning in rain. And in the passenger seat, Nia Holloway pressed her bandaged hands flat against her thighs, looked at the ramp rising ahead of them, and said nothing at all, because there was nothing left to say that the night hadn't already said for them. And because she was still here, still breathing, still thinking 3 moves ahead, and that, for now, was enough to build the rest of the night on. The vehicle reached the top of the ramp. The city opened up around them, rain-hammered and lit and enormous, and Tae-jun pulled into the street and drove. The safe house smelled like old wood and machine oil and rain coming through a window that didn't quite seal at the bottom left corner. Nia noticed the window on the way in. She noticed it the way she'd been noticing everything since the garage, with the particular hyper-vigilant attention of a body that had been running on threat response for 5 hours and had not yet received the signal that it was allowed to stop. Her eyes moved to every exit. Her ears cataloged every sound the building made as it settled. She sat in the chair nearest the wall, not the one in the center of the room, and she did it without thinking about it, the instinct already installed. The chair was wooden. It had a cushion that had been good once. She sat in it and held a glass of water in both bandaged hands and looked at the rain on the window and let the silence exist for a while, because she didn't have anything left for words. Tae-jun sat across from her. He had a phone, and he was using it low. Quiet conversations, texts dispatched in rapid succession. The infrastructure of what they'd set in motion in the parking garage, already moving through networks. She couldn't fully see. But he wasn't on the phone right now. Right now he had it face down on the table, and he was looking at the space between them with the particular stillness of a man whose mind is still running at full speed while his body has agreed, provisionally, to hold still. Do-yun's voice came from the next room. Steady, unhurried. The sound of someone managing multiple threads at once, without letting any of them show on the surface. She watched the rain on the glass. "My hand stopped hurting," she said. Tae-jun looked at her about 10 minutes ago. The palms, she turned them over and looked at the gauze. "I don't know if that's good or bad. Probably shock wearing off," he said. "Or the adrenaline is still—" She stopped. Put her hands back down. "I don't actually want to analyze it. I'm just talking." "Okay," he said. She looked at him. "You can go back to the phone." "I'm not—" She paused. "I'm functional. You don't need to sit here." "I know," he said. He didn't pick up the phone. She looked back at the window. Car passed on the street below, its headlights sweeping the ceiling of the room briefly. The rain had eased from violent to persistent, the storm's last act, running out of fury but not yet ready to stop. "The assembly contact," she said. "Park Sung-won, from Seoul." He looked at her with the focused attention that meant he was shifting gears. "I worked with him for 8 months before I came to New York," she said. He's on the advisory board of the firm Corporate Treasury, International Routing Structures. He knew I was good before I knew he was paying attention. She set the glass down on the table. "He gave me his personal email when I left. Not professional. Personal," he said. She paused, remembering. He said people with real ability always need a door they don't know about yet. Tae-jun was very still. "I have it memorized," she said. "I never used it. I thought someday it might matter, and I kept it in my head, and I never had a reason." She looked at him across the table. "I have a reason now." He was looking at her with an expression. She couldn't completely parse something that combined assessment with something less professional and more human. A kind of recognition that moved through his eyes like light moving through water. "Write the 3 points I need him to understand," she said. "The Luxembourg structure, the political exposure chain, and the authentication pathway for the documentation. Write them like a brief 3 sentences max per point. I'll write the email." He reached for the notepad on the table that Do-yun's people had left with the medical kit and the water and the other provisions of a safe house that had been prepared by someone who thought about worst-case scenarios as part of their daily professional life. He wrote. His handwriting was precise and slightly angular, the handwriting of someone who had been taught formal penmanship and had compressed it over years into something efficient. He slid the notepad across. She read it. The 3 points were exactly right. They were exactly what she would have written if she'd known the operational architecture as well as he did. She asked 2 questions. The first was about the correspondent bank relationship in Singapore and whether the authentication chain was clean enough to survive independent verification. The second was about the timeline, specifically whether the Luxembourg documentation, once in Park Sung-won's hands, could move through assembly back channels fast enough to create pressure before CO's people in Seoul had time to manage the narrative. He answered both questions, precisely, without padding. She pulled out her phone and opened her email. She wrote the email in 11 minutes. She wrote it once, read it back, changed 2 words, and read it again. Then she turned the phone toward him without comment. He read it. He read it twice. The second time was slower. He finished the second read. He looked up at her and said nothing for a moment, and in that moment something passed through his face that she'd learned to recognize over the past 5 hours as his version of being surprised, a micro-adjustment, a slight recalibration, the expression of a man whose model of a situation has just been updated. "You didn't mention Kang Meridian Group," he said. "No." "Or your own name?" "No." "It reads like an internal source." "Yes," she said. "Because if Park Sung-won receives an email from Nia Holloway, who he hasn't heard from in 4 years. At 4 in the morning, his first response is going to be figuring out who Nia Holloway is now, and whether she can be trusted and what her angle is. That takes time we don't have. She held his gaze. If it reads like it came from inside Seo's structure, he moves on it tonight. He's been waiting for something that looks like this for 6 years. He will not sit on it. Tae-jun slid the phone back across the table. Send it, he said. She sent it. The timestamp on her phone read 4:23 a. Do-yun came through from the next room. Some had specific quality of motion of someone delivering for them, was holding for a few seconds, waiting for the right moment, information that wasn't urgent enough to interrupt, but was important enough to deliver promptly. Singapore is done, he said. He directed it at Tae-jun, but he said it in a register that included the room. Full Luxembourg documentation package, transmitted and received. 3 recipients, both Seoul contacts and the London journalist. Authentication chain intact. He paused. The journalist was awake. She acknowledged receipt within 4 minutes. Said she's been building a file on Seo's political connections for 19 months, and this fills the last gap. Timeline, Tae-jun said. She said 48 hours minimum for independent verification. Probably 72 before full publication. She will not rush it, that's not how she works. Do-yun paused. But she will not sit on it either. Once she verifies the documentation chain, it goes. And before it goes, a sourced brief. 3 paragraphs, enough to establish that an investigation exists, and that documentation has been obtained. Enough to start the pressure from the Seoul side before the full piece lands. Do-yun checked his watch. It's 4:30 in Seoul. The assembly doesn't open until 9. But the people who matter don't wait for the assembly to open. Tae-jun nodded. Looked at the table, looked at the phone. Hyunwoo, he said. Talking, Do-yun said steadily. He gave us 4 assembly names in the first hour. Names I didn't have names that match 2 of the Luxembourg payment recipients in the Singapore documentation. He paused. He also gave us the internal account, routing for the shell structure. It matches the documentation exactly, which means he wasn't lying about how he found out. He did stumble into it. 8 months in, through the financial flows for his own cover operation. Do-yun's voice remained neutral. He's been sitting on it since. He didn't tell his father. Why, Tae-jun said. He didn't say. He gave me the information and then he stopped talking and asked for water and sat there for a while. Do-yun paused. My read is that he found out something about his father that changed the nature of what he was doing without changing the fact that he was doing it. And he didn't know how to stop. The room held that for a moment. Naya had been listening. She didn't say anything. She was looking at the table with her hands flat on the surface and her mind somewhere in the middle distance, and watched her absorb the information about Hyunwoo the way she'd been absorbing information all night, not pushing it away, not letting it flatten her, just taking it in and making room for it, alongside everything else. The federal prosecutor, Tae-jun said. That chain moves differently, Do-yun said. Goes through a contact in the Southern District, someone who has been aware of proximity issues for a while and has been cautious about touching anything adjacent to CO's American operations because the proximity was exactly the problem. With the documentation, the caution disappears. He paused. I expect a quiet administrative reassignment within 3 weeks, maybe less. The prosecutor will move himself before anyone has to move him. People like that always do. Tae-jun absorbed that. Tactical team from the building, he said. The 6 who recalled. Gone, Do-yun said. Clean extraction north fire stair. Staggered intervals between 12:15 and 12:30. Our people on the street saw them exit. No engagement. They were told to leave clean and they left clean. He produced his own phone and turned the screen toward Tae-jun. A frozen surveillance image, dark, grainy at the edges but clear at the center, showing a man's face in the stairwell emergency lighting, sharp enough to be identified. Secondary system in the sub-basement mechanical room. Battery-powered, separate network. They didn't know it existed. We have full face capture on 4 of the 6. Hold it, Tae-jun said. Don't use it yet. Insurance, Tae-jun confirmed. Do-yun pocketed the phone. He looked at Nia briefly, the specific look of someone who has something to say and is deciding whether now is the moment. He apparently decided it wasn't, because he said instead, there's a second room. Bed's made. She should use it. I heard that, Nia said without looking up. I know, Do-yun said after she said. Do-yun looked at Tae-jun. Tae-jun said nothing. Do-yun went back to the other room. Like green wood splitting. The rain made its sound against the window. The building made its sounds around them, the old building sounds. The wood and pipe sounds. The sounds of a structure that had been standing long enough to develop its own vocabulary. The email, she said. Park Sung-won will move on it, Tae-jun said. How long do you think? If he's the man I understand him to be, he reads it within the hour, regardless of what time it arrives. He verifies the documentation reference against what he already knows, which is enough to establish plausibility. By 6 a.m. Seoul time, he's making calls. Tae-jun paused. By the time Seo's people in Seoul understand what's moving, it's already moving. She nodded slowly. Then she said, what happens to him? Seo. Tae-jun was quiet for a moment. His organization doesn't collapse overnight. Operations like his don't collapse, they erode. Allies create distance. Political infrastructure that's been protecting his American activity becomes a liability rather than an asset. Revenue channels that depended on those relationships close. He paused. In 6 months, he's running a fraction of what he had tonight. In 18 months, that fraction is under ongoing pressure from people inside his own structure who have been waiting for the signal that his reach is diminished enough to challenge. And his reach toward us collapses in proportion to everything else. He held her gaze. He is not a stupid man. He will understand, when he sees the documentation chain, what it cost him to move on us tonight. He will understand that direct action against either of us now generates exposure he cannot afford. He paused. He will do nothing. He will wait. He will tell himself he is waiting for the right moment, and the right moment will not come. She looked at him for a long time. You believe that, she said. I believe it's the most likely outcome, he said. I won't tell you it's certain. Nothing in the world I've been living in for the last 15 years is certain. Okay, she said. She looked at the window. That's more honest than I expected. You've had a long night. I thought you deserved honesty. She almost smiled. It was the same almost smile from the garage, the one that started and ran out of momentum, and this time it made it slightly further. You're funnier than you seem, she said. I don't seem funny at all, he said. Exactly. She stood up. She picked up her blazer from the back of the chair where it had been sitting crumpled since they walked in. She shook it once. She didn't put it on, just held it over her arm. Show me the second room, she said. He stood. He led her down the short corridor to the door at the end. Inside, a bed with a gray blanket, a lamp on a side table, a window looking onto the same rain-hammered side street. Plain, functional, clean. She stood in the doorway. Tae-jun, she said. She said it to the room rather than to him, her back still turned. He waited. Thank you for not leaving me in that building. He stood behind her in the corridor. The lamp in the room made a circle of warm light in the gray hour, and she was standing at its edge looking into it, and he was aware of the distance between where he was and where she was in a way that was not about physical space. You came back to warn me, he said. There was never anything to leave you from. She was quiet for a moment. Then she went into the room and closed the door, and he stood in the corridor and listened to the rain and to Do-yun's voice in the front room running the threads of the morning and to the building settling around all of them, and he stayed there in the corridor for a moment longer than was necessary before he walked back. 3 weeks after the night in the garage, the London journalist published her preliminary brief. It was 3 paragraphs in the paper's overnight digital edition. Seo Min-chul's name appeared in the second paragraph. The Luxembourg entity was referenced. Without the full documentation, she was holding the complete package for the main investigation, but referenced with enough specificity that anyone inside Seo's organization who understood the architecture would know immediately what had been obtained and how. Tae-jun read it at 6 in the morning in his office. Do-yun had sent him the link at 5:58, with no additional commentary, which was Do-yun's way of saying, it started. 3 assembly members retained counsel before Seoul markets opened. The Ministry of Justice official's office issued a statement citing health concerns by the following Tuesday. None of these things happened loudly. They happened the way consequences usually happen to careful, powerful men quietly, in the administrative language of institutional distance, in the spaces between official statements, in the phone calls that didn't get returned, and the meetings that got quietly removed from calendars. The federal prosecutor in New York requested a voluntary reassignment to a different district on a Wednesday morning. The request was processed without ceremony. 3 weeks later, the reassignment was made permanent. Seo Min-chul issued no public statement. He returned to Seoul from a location that had not been publicly disclosed and was not subsequently disclosed. His organization continued to operate. It continued to operate the way things continue to operate after significant structural damage, maintaining the visible form, while the weight-bearing elements shifted and strained underneath. 7 of his longest-standing business relationships ended in the first 2 months, not with confrontation with the particular bloodless coldness of people who had been watching a situation develop and had now received sufficient information to make a decision they'd been postponing. Tae-jun watched all of it. He made no public moves. He responded to neither of the 2 indirect communications that reached him through third parties in the weeks, but following both of them probing, seeking the shape of his intentions, trying to establish whether there was a negotiation to be had. There was not. He let the silence answer for him, and the silence said everything that needed to be said. He was also doing something else during those weeks, something quieter and more difficult than managing the downstream effects of a single night's work. He was looking at what he'd built. He had been doing this in pieces for a long time, the particular accounting that comes to a man in his mid-30s who has spent 15 years constructing something and begins, for the first time, to stand far enough back from it to see its actual shape. The shape was not what he'd told himself it was when he was building it. It never was. The useful fictions you maintain to keep moving forward have a way of calcifying into the actual structure. A sound like green wood splitting, and then one day you're standing in an archive room at midnight and a woman is on the floor crying, and you're looking at the thing you've made and thinking about who else might be on the floor somewhere because of it. He did not dismantle anything. He was not capable of that, not because he lacked the will, but because dismantling was not how things like this worked. And he was old enough to know that the fantasy of clean exits was exactly that, a fantasy. What he did was begin the slow, imperfect, unglamorous work of restructuring from the edges inward, pulling the legitimate operations further to the front, reducing exposure at the points where the hidden architecture touched the visible one. Not purity, he had no illusions about purity, but distance incremental and real. It was slow. It was frustrating. It was the most difficult operational work he'd done in 15 years because it required him to work against the habits of an organization that had been built on entirely different principles. He did it anyway. Nia came back to Kang Meridian Group 6 weeks after the night in the garage. She came in on a Monday. She came in at 8:15, which was 15 minutes earlier than her old start time, and which nobody commented on. Wearing a blazer she'd bought over the weekend. The pregnancy had just started to show, barely, but enough that her old clothes required decisions, and she had her leather portfolio under her arm and her phone already in her hand, reading messages from the car. She went directly to the office on the south side of the executive floor. The office was not the archive room. The archive room no longer existed. In the weeks she'd been gone, Tae-jun had had the entire East End configuration of the floor demolished and rebuilt. The wall was gone. The filing systems were gone. The specific corner of the specific room where he had found her on the floor was gone, replaced by a conference room with a long table and good lighting and no particular history. Her office faced south and west, glass on 2 sides. The city in the morning was clear and direct from here, without the slightly oblique angle of the executive floor's north-facing windows, no filtered light, just the city straight on, doing what the city did. She sat down at the desk and opened her laptop. She did not make it into anything. She did not acknowledge the office or the view or the implicit statement of what it represented. She sat down and opened her email and went to work, which was the most important thing she could do on the first day, and which she had understood before she walked in. The first week had rough edges. She passed the corridor where the archive room had been on her second day and stopped. She stood outside the conference room door for a moment, looking at the ordinary wood and glass of it, the ordinary conference table visible through the window, the ordinary chairs arranged around it. She stood there long enough for one of the junior staff to glance at her twice before looking away, uncertain whether to say anything. She opened the door and walked in. She stood in the middle of the conference room. The light was good. The table was new, The chairs were new. The smell was new construction and fresh paint and nothing else. Turned in a slow circle, taking the room in from each direction. Then she walked back out and went to her office and sat down and kept working. She had nightmares. They came in a pattern that was irregular enough to be unpredictable and regular enough to be recognizable. The maintenance shaft, the garage, the specific quality of Hyun-woo's voice when he said certain words. Kept a light on in the bedroom for the first month. She did not tell anyone except her doctor, who referred her to someone, and she went to that someone's office once a week for the next 4 months and sat in a chair across from a woman who had steady eyes and a specific talent for asking the next question after the question she'd already answered. It was not easy. It was the right kind of not easy. The kind that was doing something, moving something, shifting the weight of the thing rather than just sitting under it. The pregnancy was healthy. Her doctor said this at every appointment, and every appointment she received it with the same incremental trust, not complete, not immediate, but growing, building, adding to itself the way trust builds when evidence keeps arriving. She named the child in her second trimester. She decided it alone, in her apartment, a temporary apartment, a rental with good light, and a lease she'd signed for 6 months, while she figured out something longer term, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and the particular morning quiet of a city that hasn't quite woken up yet. She wrote the name on a piece of paper, looked at it, crossed out a middle name option she'd been considering, and didn't write another one. Looked at the first name and the last name and the space between them and felt the rightness of it settle into her chest like something completing a circuit. Micah Holloway. She told her mother over the phone that evening. Her mother cried immediately. The specific sound of a woman who has been frightened for her daughter and is receiving information. That means the fear can ease by a fraction. Naya held the phone away from her ear and pressed her lips together and waited until her mother's breathing evened out, and then said, "He's going to be okay, Mama. I'm going to make sure he's okay," she told Tae-jun 2 days later. In the office, at the end of a meeting about the restructured financial reporting architecture, a meeting in which she had delivered a 40-minute presentation that had reconfigured how the senior team understood their own compliance exposure, and during which Tae-jun had said almost nothing, because there was almost nothing that needed adding. After the last person left the room, she said, "I've decided on a name." He looked at her. "Micah Holloway," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once and said nothing further. She had expected nothing further. She'd have been unsettled by anything further. The nod was exactly right, and she suspected he knew that. Tae-jun was present through the pregnancy in a way she had not anticipated and had not asked for, and found herself, unable to imagine having been without. He did not hover. He was not sentimental about it. He asked once, in the early weeks, whether she wanted him at the doctor's appointments. Said it plainly without preamble. "Do you want me there?" And when she said Essie, he came. And when he came, he sat in the waiting room and did not make it into anything. And when the appointments were done, he returned to work and did not refer to them again unless she brought them up. He rearranged his schedule around her needs without mentioning that he was doing it. She noticed because she was someone who noticed how schedules were structured. It was her professional formation, the capacity to read a calendar and understand what it was actually saying, and what she saw, reading the adjustments, was a man who had quietly moved his morning meetings to afternoons on the days her energy was lowest in the first trimester, and who had done it without a word. She said nothing. She noticed and she said nothing, and she let it mean what it meant. There was a meeting, 4 months in, where one of the senior partners made a comment about one of her projections dismissive, a sound like green wood splitting, the kind of comment men make when they are uncertain about their standing, with a woman who is clearly better at their shared work than they are, and respond to that uncertainty by looking for ways to reduce her. He said it in the casual register of someone who expected to be agreed with. Tae-jun said, "Ms. Holloway's analysis is the basis on which we are proceeding. If you have a specific numerical objection, I'll hear it." The man did not have a specific numerical objection. The meeting continued. She did not thank Tae-jun for it. He did not expect to be thanked. She filed it in the same place she'd been filing everything: the rearranged schedule, the waiting rooms, the one-word answer about the name, and let it accumulate into the pictures it was slowly becoming. Micah was born at 4:42 in the morning on a Tuesday in early autumn. Labor was long and not uncomplicated, the particular, specific intensity of a process that makes very clear it has its own timeline and its own terms, and that the person going through it is along for the ride in a more fundamental way than any other experience in their life has previously made clear. She went to the hospital at 11 p.m. the night before, Do-Yun's car taking her with her hospital bag that she'd packed and repacked 3 times, and she called Tae-jun from the car not because she'd planned to, but because the contraction that hit on the way was the worst one yet, and she needed to be on the phone with someone who would not panic. He did not panic, he said. "I'll be there," she said. "You don't have to," he said. "I'll be there," and hung up and was there when she arrived. He stayed. He sat in the chair beside the bed, and he stayed for all of it, the hours of it, the difficult hours, the hours when she was past conversation and past performance, and was simply a body doing the most demanding thing a body can do. He sat in the chair, and when she reached for his hand, he gave her his hand, and he did not make a sound when she gripped it hard enough to whiten his knuckles, and he did not look away. 4:42 in the morning, she heard Micah cry for the first time. It was the most specific sound she'd ever heard. Not the abstract crying of a baby, its particular sound, this particular voice, the specific and unrepeatable first announcement of this person arriving in the world. She felt it do something in her chest that she would not be able to describe to anyone afterward, not because she lacked the words, but because words operated at the wrong level. She held him. She held him and looked at his face and felt the weight of him, 7 pounds, 11 ounces, substantial, real, here, and she was so completely inside the experience that it took her a moment to remember there were other people in the room. She looked up. Tae-jun was standing at the far side of the room, near the window, giving her the moment in the way he gave her things without announcement, just creating the space and standing back from it. He was looking at Micah with an expression she had never seen on his face before and had not seen on anyone's face before. An expression that existed below the threshold of the calculated and the managed and the performed, something that had gotten through whatever system he'd built to regulate what showed on his face, because the system had not been designed to handle this particular input. "Come here," she said. He came. He stood beside the bed and looked at Micah, and then he reached out with one careful hand and let Micah's fingers close around his. The grip was immediate, complete. The grip of someone who has not yet learned that the world is a place where you hold back. Tae-jun looked at that grip. He looked at it for a long time. When he looked up at Nia, his face was still wearing that expression, the one that had gotten through the system, and she looked back at him across the weight of everything the last year had been. And she felt something shift, slowly, like a continent moving, like something that had been building under the surface for a long time, finally acknowledging its own presence. She would think about it later. Many times, over the months that followed, she would come back to this moment and try to locate exactly when something became something else. And she would keep arriving here, 4:42 in the morning, a child's hand around a man's finger, 2 people looking at each other across the distance of everything it had taken to reach this room. She moved into the Brooklyn apartment on a Saturday in late spring, east-facing windows, morning light coming in long and honest and unfiltered. She had looked at 11 apartments, and this was the one that had felt immediately like it was waiting for her, not because it was beautiful, though the light was, but because it had the quality she'd been looking for, without knowing she was looking for it, the quality of being simply and completely hers. She put her grandmother's things on the shelf above the kitchen window, which was where her grandmother had always put the things she wanted to see every day. The small blue dish her grandmother had bought at a market in Mississippi before Nia was born. The 2 photographs, both in frames that needed repair, but that she had not repaired and would not repair because repairing them would change them. The particular arrangement of these things on this shelf made the kitchen feel immediately like a place she had always been, which was the specific alchemy of her grandmother's objects, in a space in which she had come to understand was a form of inheritance that had nothing to do with money. She put Micah's crib in the room with the best morning light. She stood in the middle of her living room boxes around her, her furniture placed roughly and awaiting refinement, her life form of its material components stacked against the walls, and she let herself feel the weight of it. Not the romantic version, not the clean narrative version, but the real version, which was heavier and more honest and cost more. She had come a long way from an archive room floor. She had not come a straight line, and she would not have asked to. A sound like green wood splitting. The straight line would have missed everything that had happened in between, and everything that had happened in between was exactly the thing that had made her into the person standing in this apartment, in this light, with this child asleep down the hall. Her phone buzzed. Tae-jun, how's the light? She looked at the east windows. The morning was doing what it did, coming in low and long and filling the room from the far wall back, the particular light of early spring that has warmth in it, without insistence, light that suggests rather than demands. She typed, perfect. She held the phone for a moment after sending it. Then she put it in her pocket and picked up a box. Marked kitchen, her grandmother's dishes inside. She'd packed them herself and carried it to the counter under the east window and started unpacking. The real conversation happened 6 weeks later. She had Mike on her hip and was in the kitchen of Tae-jun's estate. She came on Sunday mornings, had been coming on Sunday mornings for the past 2 months, not because anyone had established it as a pattern, but because it had become one. A sound like green wood splitting, the way some things become patterns without being decided, and she was attempting the coffee machine and failing in the particular way she always failed with the coffee machine, which had a process that required steps in a specific order that she kept getting almost right. Tae-jun came into the kitchen and looked at what she'd done to the machine and took over without commentary, the way he always did, a sound like green wood splitting, and made the coffee while she held Micah and leaned against the counter and watched the morning come through the kitchen window. I've been thinking about the position, she said. He didn't look up from the machine. And I think it's right, she said. Scope is right. The structure is right. She shifted Micah to her other hip. He was at the stage where everything was interesting. The window, the coffee machine, the particular quality of light on the counter, and he was watching the coffee machine with the focused attention of someone encountering a genuinely novel phenomenon. I want to talk about the financial compliance architecture. I think the current structure has exposure points you're not seeing clearly because you're too close to the operational side. I know, he said. That's why I want you in the position. I'm going to change things, she said. Not just optimize them. Actually change them. I know that too. She looked at his back. He was coffee, precise and unhurried. You're not going to give me any resistance on that? If I wanted someone to optimize the existing structure, I would have hired an optimizer, he said. I'm hiring you because the existing structure needs to be changed, and I have known it for longer than I've been comfortable admitting, and I need someone who will see it clearly enough to change it without sentiment. She was quiet for a moment. You've been working on this, she said. The restructuring. I've been watching the compliance reports. The edges are different than they were a year ago. Yes, it's slow. Yes, it's going to take longer than you probably want it to take. Most things worth doing take longer than you want, he said. He turned around with 2 cups and set one on the counter beside her hand. That's not new information. She looked at him. Micah reached for the coffee cup with the exploratory confidence of someone who has not yet learned that hot things are hot, and she redirected his hand without looking. What are you actually building? She said. In 5 years. What does it look like? He leaned against the opposite counter and looked at his cup. Legitimate on the surface and moving toward legitimate underneath. Not all the way. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that's realistic, because it isn't, and you know it isn't. But further than it is. Enough further that the thing's worth protecting. He stopped. His eyes moved briefly to Micah and then back to his cup. Are actually protected. She looked at him steadily. You mean him, she said. I mean several things, he said. He's one of them. She was quiet. You didn't have to do any of it, she said. The way she said it was not accusatory and not sentimental. It was the plain statement of a fact she had been examining for a long time from multiple angles and kept finding true. The waiting rooms. The schedule. None of it was in any job description or any obligation. No, he said. Why, she said. He looked at her. In the morning light of the kitchen, a sound like green wood splitting, without the armor of a boardroom or the adrenaline of a parking garage or any of the contexts in which they had developed their understanding of each other, he looked like what he was. A man in his mid-30s who had spent a long time building things that didn't require him to be vulnerable and was standing in a kitchen on a Sunday morning being asked a question that required him to be exactly that. "Because you came back," he said, "to a building you knew might be the last place you'd ever be. You came back to warn me, and you didn't have to, and you did it anyway, and I have been—" He paused, found the next word with visible care. "I have been trying to be the kind of man who was worth coming back for." Kitchen held that. Micah made a small, satisfied sound. He'd found her jacket zipper and was working it with both hands, deeply absorbed. She looked at Tae-jun across the kitchen and felt the thing she'd been feeling. For months, the thing she'd been naming carefully and slowly, and without rushing. Because the last time she'd rushed toward something that felt like this, she'd been sitting on an archive room floor, resolve into a shape she could hold. "You are," she said for the record. He looked at her. "I'm not saying it's simple," she said. "I'm not saying I know what it looks like. I'm saying—" She stopped, looked at Micah, who had gotten the zipper halfway down and was immensely pleased with himself. "I'm saying that you are. That's all." He nodded. The nod that was his version of receiving something important without diminishing it by saying too much. She picked up her coffee with her free hand. He picked up his. A sunbeam. They stood on opposite sides of the kitchen in the Sunday morning light, and the apartment was quiet around them. And Micah worked the zipper with total concentration, and outside the Hudson, moved in the way the Hudson moved, unconcerned with anything happening on its banks, just going where it was going. A year and 4 months after the night in the parking garage, Tae-jun brought Nia to the 54th floor of Kang Meridian Group on a Thursday evening after the building had emptied. He didn't explain why. He said, "Come up to the floor before you leave," and she came. He walked her to the south side of the floor, her side. Her office, the glass that faced Manhattan in the direct way she'd come to think of, as the view that belonged to her work life. The view that says, "This is real. This is yours. You are here." Then he walked her to the east end. The conference room was gone. In its place was a wider corridor that opened into a new space she hadn't seen in her design, a glass-walled room at the building's east corner, 2 full glass walls meeting at a right angle, the city visible from 2 directions at once. An antechamber almost, connecting to her office on the south side and to the executive corridor on the north. Not an archive room, not a storage room. Something that was simply and purely a place to be in the building, with a view of the city from a corner she had not previously had access to. She stood in the middle of it and looked at the city from 2 sides. "You demolished the conference room," she said. "It wasn't the right room," he said. She turned around. He was standing in the doorway. Behind him, through the glass walls of her office, Manhattan was doing its evening thing, lights coming on across the midtown grid, the sky doing what the sky did at this hour. The specific color of a city that has survived another day and is settling into the night version of itself. She stopped. She was looking at the corner where the 2 glass walls met. "You can see all the way to Brooklyn from here." "Yes," he said. She looked out at the city for a long moment. Then she turned back. She had Micah on her hip. She'd brought him today. A rare Thursday, a school pickup that had run into a work meeting that had run into this, and he was looking at the city with his full attention. The way he looked at everything, the way she hoped he would keep looking at everything. She walked toward the doorway where Tae-jun was standing. She stopped when she was a few feet from him and looked at him directly, the way she'd learned to look at him without managing the distance. "Last year," she said, "I thought I'd destroyed everything." "I know," he said. "I thought coming back to the building was the worst decision I'd ever made." She paused. "It was the best one." He looked at her. That expression, the one that had gotten through the system, the one she'd first seen in the hospital at 4:42 in the morning, was present again. Not hidden, not managed. Just there. She reached for his hand. He took it. Micah, between them, reached for Tae-jun's sleeve with his free hand and grabbed a fistful of jacket and held on with the complete, uncomplicated confidence of a child who has decided that this person is someone worth holding on to. The city went on outside the glass, enormous and indifferent and full of lives, being lived in every direction, and in the east corner of the 54th floor of Kang Meridian Group, 3 people stood. In the evening light, and the story that a manufactured love had tried to write for them was finished, replaced by the one they'd written themselves. and some particular language of people who had been through something real together and had come out on the other side, changed in ways they were still learning the names for. She had not surrendered. He had not run. The child, whose beginning had been calculated as leverage, was here in his mother's arms grabbing a fistful of a man's jacket. And the fistful of jacket was the whole story, the thing no architecture of a manipulation had been able to account for, thing that happened in the space between control and its limits, the small, insistent, unreasonable fact of what people become to each other when they decide to stay. So outside, Manhattan lit itself one window at a time against the coming dark, and the city did what cities do. It kept going, indifferent to endings, already building toward whatever came next.